Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Celestial Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary floated in the black like a terrible idea wrapped in titanium and hope. 12 decks of reinforced habitat modules, each one housing something that could, and frequently tried to, tear through steel plating with varying degrees of success. The brochure called it the galaxy's premier conservation facility for endangered apex predators. The insurance companies called it that lawsuit waiting to happen. Zoe called it Tuesday. Well, not literally Tuesday. She'd lost track of actual days somewhere around the third solar cycle when distinguishing between the day the Vorashi cubs set fire to the hydroponics bay and the day the Vorashi cubs set fire to the other hydroponics bay became an exercise in futility. Right now, standing in Observation Gallery C with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, Zoe watched the visiting dignitaries file in like they were attending a funeral. Their funeral, specifically, if the way they clutched their protective gear was any indication. She recognized the type. Bureaucrats and ambassadors who'd never been closer to a real predator than a nature documentary, here to judge whether humanity's soft approach to xenobiology was genius or suicidal stupidity. Spoiler alert, they'd already made up their minds. Is that her? The question came from a Chitix ambassador near the front, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the gallery lights. 4 compound eyes swiveled in Zoe's direction with all the warmth of a tax audit. The human who claims she can communicate with Class 5 predators? Rukthor. She'd read his file. Decorated military career, survived the frontier wars, lost half his platoon to creatures that made the things in this facility look like household pets. He had opinions about predator management, and those opinions generally involved orbital bombardment followed by a celebratory drink. "That's me," Zoe said, not bothering to look away from the viewport. Below, in Enclosure 12, 3 thornback ravager cubs prowled their habitat with the kind of restless energy that usually preceded something expensive breaking. Though communicate might be overselling it, mostly I just try not to die. One of the other ambassadors, a gelatinous something or other whose name badge Zoe couldn't pronounce, rippled with what might have been laughter or indigestion. "Your reputation suggests more than mere survival, human Zoe. We've heard you can predict predator behavior with uncanny accuracy." "Oh, that's easy," Zoe said, taking a sip of cold coffee and immediately regretting it. "They're going to try to kill you. See? Prediction." Rukthor's mandibles clicked together in what was definitely not amusement. "Flippancy. How refreshingly human. Tell me, do you jest because you're confident, or because you're trying to convince yourself you're not terrified?" Zoe finally turned to face him. And yeah, up close he was even less pleasant. His compound eyes reflected her image a dozen times over, each one looking equally unimpressed. Little of both, if I'm honest. Keeps things interesting. Interesting. Rukthor's antennae twitched. My species has a saying, interesting is what prey calls the moment before it dies. Your species also evacuates entire colonies when you find a nest of thornbacks, Zoe pointed out, gesturing toward the enclosure below. We raise them. You contain them, Rukthor corrected. Behind force fields and reinforced alloys, this proves nothing except that humans are adequately competent with engineering. Before Zoe could respond, and oh, she had a response queued up and ready to go, the lights in the gallery flickered, once, twice. Then the kind of steady, ominous dimming that meant something had gone catastrophically wrong with the power grid. The head of security, a human named Holloway, who'd gone gray dealing with situations exactly like this, appeared on every screen in the gallery simultaneously. His expression suggested he'd aged another 5 years in the last 5 seconds. Code Crimson in Enclosure 12, he said, his voice carrying that special blend of professional calm and internal screaming that came with experience. Containment field failure. Thornback ravagers are loose. All personnel evacuate to safe zones immediately. I repeat. Zoe didn't hear the rest. She was already moving toward the gallery exit, coffee cup abandoned on the nearest console. Behind her, the dignitaries erupted into the kind of controlled panic that involved a lot of formal protocol, and not a lot of actual running. "Where are you going?" Rookthor's voice cut through the commotion. "The evacuation route is in the opposite direction." "I'm aware," Zoe called back, breaking into a jog. "I'm not evacuating. That is—" Whatever else Rookthor was going to say got lost, as Zoe rounded the corner and hit the emergency stairs at a pace that suggested either bravery or a complete absence of survival instinct. Possibly both. 3 flights down, through 2 security checkpoints that waved her through with expressions of resigned horror, and Zoe found herself at the entrance to Enclosure 12. Through the reinforced transparasteel viewing panel, she could see the cubs, each one roughly the size of an adult human, covered in overlapping obsidian scales that caught the emergency lighting like broken glass. 6 legs apiece, each ending in claws that could punch through ship hulls given enough motivation. Bioluminescent markings ran along their spines, pulsing red with agitation. Beautiful. Terrifying. Currently surrounding 2 security officers who'd frozen in place like they'd just realized they'd made several poor life choices. Zoe accessed the intercom. "Holloway, pull your people out. Slowly. I'm going in." There was a pause. Then, "Zoe, I love you like a sister, but that's the stupidest thing I've heard all cycle. And I once heard someone suggest we feed the Varashi cubs disco music to calm them down. Did it work? They ate the sound system. See? Progress." Zoe was already cycling through the airlock, ignoring the increasingly frantic messages popping up on her comm unit. Most of them were from Holloway. One was from Facility Insurance. She ignored that one especially hard. The inner door hissed open, and suddenly Zoe was standing in the enclosure with 3 juvenile apex predators who'd just discovered that freedom tasted like broken force fields and opportunity. The security officers were still frozen, which was actually the smartest thing they could do. Movement triggered hunting instincts. Everyone knew that. Well, everyone except the cubs, apparently, because the moment Zoe stepped fully into the enclosure, all 3 heads snapped toward her with the kind of laser focus usually reserved for prey items and food dispensers. She could hear Holloway's voice in her earpiece, distant and tinny. "Zoe, for the love of... the Trank team is 60 seconds out. Just stay still." But Zoe wasn't staying still. She was walking forward, slowly, deliberately, right toward the nearest cub. The one with the crooked marking on its left haunch. She'd nicknamed it Scar, because creativity wasn't her strong suit at 3 in the morning when the nameplates needed updating. Scar lowered its head, bioluminescent markings flaring brighter. A warning display. Its mouth opened slightly, revealing rows of teeth that had been designed by evolution with a single purpose: killing things efficiently. Zoe extended her right arm, the one with the reinforced guard she wore during feeding times. Standard protocol equipment, rated for exactly this kind of scenario, which meant it would maybe, possibly, slow down a bite for the half-second it took for her to realize she'd made a terrible mistake. Scar's lips pulled back further. Then it lunged. The bite came fast, harder than Zoe had expected, even though she'd expected it to be bad. The pressure was immense. She felt the arm guard compress, heard the material creak in protest. Scar's teeth found purchase on the reinforced plating, and the cub started to shake its head, the way predators do when they're trying to tear meat from bone. Every instinct Zoe possessed was screaming at her to pull back, to run, to do literally anything except what she did next. She raised her arm higher. Scar, still clamped onto the guard, suddenly found itself being lifted off the ground. Its 6 legs scrambled for purchase, claws scratching against Zoe's protective gear, against the air, against absolutely nothing useful. The bioluminescent markings flickered in what might have been confusion. Predators understood fear. They understood prey that ran, prey that fought back, prey that froze. What they didn't understand was prey that helped them climb. Still holding her arm steady, and yeah, her shoulder was going to file a formal complaint about this later, Zoe watched as Scar made a decision. Instead of letting go and retreating, the cub adjusted its grip and, with the kind of problem-solving ability that made thornbacks such successful apex predators, climbed up onto Zoe's shoulder. All 120 kilograms of juvenile death machine perched on her like it had just won some kind of competition and was waiting for the prize. In the observation gallery, Zoe could see them through the viewport. The dignitaries had stopped evacuating. Rookthor stood at the front, his compound eyes fixed on the scene below with an expression that was hard to read on a chitinous face, but probably translated to something like, "What the hell am I looking at?" The other two cubs, who'd been circling with intent, stopped. Their heads tilted in unison, the universal gesture of confusion transcending species. One of them, Spike, because again 3 a.m. naming conventions, took a tentative step forward, then sat down. Just sat, like a puppy who'd been offered a treat and was now waiting to see if there were more treats forthcoming. The third cub, the smallest, Runner, who'd earned the name by doing exactly that at every opportunity, made a sound that was halfway between a chirp and a growl. Something curious, not threatening. Zoe, with Scar still balanced on her shoulder like the world's most dangerous parrot, slowly extended her other arm. Spike bounded forward. There was no other word for it. The creature actually bounded and pressed its snout against her hand, not biting, investigating. The bioluminescent markings had shifted from angry red to a softer amber, the color they showed during feeding time when they were content and safe. "Well," Zoe said, her voice steady despite the fact that her heart was trying to punch its way out of her chest. "That's one way to make friends?" In her earpiece, Holloway had gone completely silent. Either he'd fainted or he was too busy having a crisis to form words. The security officers, finally unfrozen, backed slowly toward the exit. Smart. The cubs ignored them completely, too focused on the weird human who'd turned what should have been a hunt into something they didn't have a category for. Rookthor's voice crackled over the facility's comm system, overriding whatever Holloway had been about to say. "What is the meaning of this? How is she still alive?" Zoe carefully, very carefully, reached up with her free hand and scratched Scar behind where its auditory ridge would be. The cub leaned into the touch, and, yeah, that was definitely a purr. A purr from a creature that had killed 3 training drones last month during enrichment exercises. "The meaning," Zoe said, knowing her words were being broadcast to the entire gallery, "is that predators don't know what to do when you stop acting like prey. Confusion beats fear. Every single time." There was a long silence. Then Rookthor's voice again, colder now. "You were lucky. This proves nothing." Zoe looked up at the observation gallery, at the rows of alien dignitaries who'd come here expecting to see humanity's methods fail. At Rookthor, whose entire military doctrine was built on the principle that some things needed to be destroyed before they destroyed you. "You're right," she said. "One demonstration proves nothing. So how about this? You give me a real test. Something actually dangerous. Let's see if luck has anything to do with it." Even from here, she could see Rookthor's antennae stiffen. She'd just challenged him, publicly, in front of witnesses from a dozen different species. His reputation was on the line now, same as hers. His response came quickly. "Very well, human Zoe. There is a situation. Obscura 5, a mining colony in the outer reaches. Scourge stalkers have overrun the facility. 23 confirmed deaths, 15 missing. Coalition forces have surrounded the area, but every attempt at extraction has resulted in more casualties. The creatures are too fast, too adaptable. Command has authorized orbital bombardment as a final solution. Zoe felt her stomach drop. Scourge stalkers, shape-shifting ambush hunters with enough intelligence to set traps and enough aggression to make Thornbacks look friendly. She'd read about them, studied the footage. Nobody had ever successfully dealt with them non-lethally. If you can resolve this situation without destroying the creatures, Rookthor continued, and there was satisfaction in his voice now, the sound of someone who'd just played what he thought was a winning hand. I will personally recommend humanity for the Coalition's Elite Conservation Council. Your methods will be studied and adopted galaxy-wide. He paused, and Zoe knew what was coming next. However, when you fail, and you will fail, humanity's soft approach will be officially discredited. Your facility will be shut down, your techniques banned. We will return to proven methods, elimination of threats, not coddling them. On her shoulder, Scar shifted its weight, claws pricking through her protective gear. Not enough to break skin, but enough to remind her exactly what she was standing with. Enough to remind her that one wrong move, one miscalculation, and these cubs could have torn her apart. Enough to remind her that she'd made the right choice anyway. Deal, Zoe said. I'll need a team. Small. People who can follow instructions without shooting first. You'll have whatever resources you require, Rookthor said. I look forward to your failure. The comm clicked off. In the sudden silence of the enclosure, Zoe could hear the cubs breathing, the soft hum of the facility's life support, the distant thrum of the orbital habitat's rotation. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds, sounds that were about to be replaced by something considerably less peaceful. Holloway, Zoe said into her comm, get a transport ready, and find me someone who's good in a crisis and won't panic when things inevitably go sideways. Zoe, Holloway's voice came back, and he sounded tired. Things are already sideways. We're well past sideways. Sideways is in the rearview mirror. Then I guess we're going upside down. Zoe carefully extracted herself from the cubs, who seemed reluctant to let her go now that they'd decided she was interesting. Get Holly. She owes me for that thing with the Varashi cubs. She said she'd shoot you if you ever brought that up again. Perfect. She's already in the right mindset. Scar chirped at her as she moved toward the exit, the sound almost plaintive. Zoe paused, looking back at 3 juvenile predators who, by all rights, should have killed her 8 minutes ago. Don't worry, she told them. I'll be back. Someone's got to make sure you don't eat the interns. The cubs watched her leave, their bioluminescent markings flickering in patterns that almost looked like concern. Almost. In the observation gallery, the dignitaries were already departing, their whispered conversations no doubt full of speculation and judgment. Only Rookthor remained, his compound eyes fixed on the enclosure below, watching the cubs settle back into their normal routines like the last 15 minutes had been nothing more than an interesting diversion. He didn't look satisfied. He looked thoughtful. And that, Zoe reflected as she stepped into the corridor and headed for the shuttle bay, was possibly more dangerous than anything waiting for her on Obscura 5. Holly showed up at the shuttle bay, looking exactly like someone who'd been woken up, told she was going on a suicide mission, and decided that caffeine was a reasonable substitute for self-preservation. Her cybernetic left arm gleamed under the loading dock lights, a souvenir from her military days that she'd once described as the universe's way of saying I should have stayed in bed that day. I hate you, she said by way of greeting, dropping her gear bag with a thud that suggested it was full of either medical supplies or small explosives. Possibly both. I hate you. I hate this facility, and I especially hate that I'm going to say yes. You haven't heard the mission brief yet, Zoe pointed out, running through the pre-flight checklist with the kind of focus that came from really not wanting to think about what came after pre-flight. Don't need to. It's you, which means it's stupid, dangerous, and somehow going to work despite violating every principle of common sense. Holly climbed aboard the shuttle, her boots clanging on the deck plating. Also, Holloway told me about the Thornback thing. That was insane. Clinically insane. It worked. A stopped clock works twice a day. Doesn't mean I'm going to use it for navigation. Their third team member arrived with considerably less commentary and considerably more limbs. Ixcaran stood roughly 2 meters tall, his scales a deep green that shifted to amber at the edges. Camouflage adaptation, Zoe remembered from his file. 4 arms meant 4 different weapons he could theoretically carry, though right now he was only holding a data pad, and what looked like extreme reluctance. "Human Zoe," he said, his voice carrying the slight hiss common to his species. "I am told you require a scout familiar with hostile fauna protocols." "That's the polite way of putting it," Zoe said. "The impolite way is that you've seen more colleagues die to predators than anyone else willing to take this job, which makes you either the most experienced or the most cursed. I'm hoping for the former." Ixcaran's inner eyelids flickered. A gesture Zoe had learned meant something between amusement and resignation. "On my world, we have a saying, the survivor is not the one who never fell, but the one who learned where the ground was weak." "I have fallen many times, human Zoe. I know all the weak ground." "Perfect. We're going to need that." Zoe sealed the shuttle hatch and moved to the pilot's seat. "Holloway, we're clear for departure." The comm crackled. "Zoe, last chance to reconsider. Obscura 5 is a nightmare. Coalition forces lost an entire tactical unit last week." "Then it's a good thing we're not a tactical unit," Zoe said, initiating the launch sequence. "We're 3 idiots with a theory about predator behavior and a statistically improbable survival rate. What could go wrong?" "Everything," Holly muttered from the co-pilot seat. "Literally everything." The shuttle detached from Celestial Ridge with the gentle grace of a controlled fall, which was basically the story of Zoe's entire career. Through the viewport, the facility grew smaller, a metal cylinder full of creatures that could kill you, staffed by people who'd decided that was an acceptable workplace hazard. "So," Holly said once they'd cleared the station's gravity well, "are you going to tell us the actual plan? Or are we doing the thing where you make it up as we go and somehow don't die?" "Little of both," Zoe admitted. "But here's what I know about scourge stalkers. They're ambush predators, shapeshifters. They can mimic terrain, other creatures, even technology if they study it long enough. Coalition soldiers have been walking into traps because they can't tell what's real and what's predator." "Comforting," Holly said. "Super comforting." Ixcaran leaned forward from the passenger bay, 2 of his arms braced against the bulkhead. "I lost 3 clutchmates to scourge stalkers on Frontier Station. They are not merely dangerous, they are intelligent. They learn, adapt. The tactics that work once will fail the second time." "Right. So standard combat doctrine is useless." Zoe pulled up the data files on Obscura 5, scanning through casualty reports that made for extremely depressing reading. "But here's the thing. Why are they there at all? Scourge stalkers are native to jungle worlds, high humidity, dense vegetation. Obscura 5 is a mining colony, desert planet, nothing they'd want naturally." Holly frowned, her organic eye narrowing while her cybernetic one ran through data overlays. "You think they were brought there? Smuggled? Or," Zoe said slowly, pieces clicking together in her head like a puzzle made of terrible implications, "they were already there. Underground. The mining operation went deep. Really deep. What if they didn't invade the colony? What if the colony invaded them?" Silence filled the shuttle, broken only by the hum of the engines and the distant ping of the navigation system tracking their jump coordinates. "That would mean—" Ixcaran's voice had gone quiet. "They are defending territory, protecting something." "A nest," Zoe said. "Has to be. All those casualties, all those attacks, not hunting behavior. defense. The colonists drilled right into their breeding ground, and the scourge stalkers are doing what any parent would do when something threatens their young. Holly let out a long breath. Okay, so hypothetically, and I'm using that word very generously here, let's say you're right. Let's say these things are just scared parents with really unfortunate murder capabilities. What's the plan? We can't exactly knock on their door and explain it was a misunderstanding. No, Zoe agreed. But we can stop acting like invaders and start acting like, well, like we're not there to hurt them. Rukthor is going to love this, Holly said, by which I mean he's going to absolutely hate this and probably try to have us arrested. Rukthor thinks the only good predator is a dead predator, Zoe said. He's wrong, but he's also watching, which means we need to not just survive this, we need to prove that understanding beats extermination. The shuttle's navigation system chimed, jump sequence ready. Holloway taught me something, Zoe said, mostly to herself but loud enough for the others to hear. Back when I was learning this job, he said predators don't respect strength, they respect confidence. They can smell fear, but they can also sense when you know what you're doing. Even if you're terrified, even if you're making it up as you go, if you act like you belong there, they hesitate. And in that hesitation, you can find understanding. And if they don't hesitate? Ixcaran asked. Zoe initiated the jump, and the stars stretched into lines. Then Holly's going to have a lot of work to do, and I'm going to have a very short and educational final lesson in predator behavior. Fantastic, Holly said. I'll prep the trauma kit, the big one. As the shuttle hurtled through hyperspace toward Obscura 5, toward whatever was waiting in those mining tunnels, Zoe thought about Scar. About the moment when the cub could have torn her arm off and instead decided to climb up and sit on her shoulder like a trophy. About the split second when everything could have gone fatally wrong and didn't. She thought about Rukthor's compound eyes, watching from the observation gallery, waiting for her to fail. She thought about 23 dead colonists and 15 missing, and creatures who were probably just as scared as the humans they'd killed. And she thought, this is either going to be brilliant, or it's going to be the last stupid thing I ever do. Knowing her luck, it would probably be both. Obscura 5 looked like someone had taken a mining colony and run it through a horror movie filter. Twice. The surface installations were intact, mostly, but the emergency lighting gave everything a sickly red glow that suggested either a power crisis or a really committed set designer. Automated defenses ringed the perimeter, their targeting systems, tracking the shuttle with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for wasps at a picnic. Cheerful place, Holly remarked as they descended. Really screams, come on down, nothing bad has happened here. The landing pad was crowded with coalition military hardware, gunships, armored transports, and enough firepower to crack a small moon. Soldiers in full combat gear watched their shuttle touch down with expressions that ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. Zoe recognized the look. She'd seen it before, usually right before someone told her that her methods were interesting in theory, but impractical in the field. Commander Salthrix met them at the base of the shuttle ramp. She was Chittix, like Rukthor, but where he'd been all bureaucratic disdain, she radiated the kind of weary competence that came from watching too many soldiers die for not enough results. Her mandibles clicked in what might have been a greeting, or might have been the insectoid equivalent of a heavy sigh. "Human Zoe," she said, her voice carrying the flat affect of someone who'd run out of emotional responses somewhere around Casualty 15. "Ambassador Rukthor informed me you would be attempting a non-lethal intervention. I assume he also informed you that we've tried everything short of orbital bombardment?" "He mentioned it," Zoe said, shouldering her gear pack. "What he didn't mention was whether anyone bothered to figure out why they're attacking." Salthrix's antennae stiffened. The why is irrelevant when personnel are dying. "We've lost contact with the lower mining tunnels entirely. 15 colonists are still trapped down there, if they're even alive. Every rescue attempt has ended in additional casualties. Because you're going in like an invasion force, Zoe said. And yeah, she could feel Holly wincing beside her. Telling a military commander their tactics were wrong was definitely on the list of things that get you thrown off missions, right between excessive sarcasm and being correct but annoying about it. Salthrix's compound eyes fixed on Zoe with the kind of intensity that could probably melt steel if she focused hard enough. Explain. Scourge stalkers are ambush predators, Zoe said. Territorial. Everything about your approach screams threat. Heavy weapons, tactical formations, aggressive advancement. You're triggering their defense response. And your alternative is what, exactly? Walking in unarmed and hoping they don't tear you apart? Yes, Zoe said simply. Well, mostly unarmed. Holly's bringing medical supplies. Karen's got non-lethal deterrents, but no heavy weapons, no armor, nothing that reads as hostile. Salthrix was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're insane. I respect that, but you're insane." "I've been hearing that a lot lately," Zoe admitted. "Can we access the tunnel network from here?" The commander gestured toward a reinforced entrance flanked by enough security to guard a planetary treasury. "Service tunnel C9. It's the safest route to the lower levels, though safest is doing a lot of work in that sentence. My soldiers will escort you to the descent point, but they won't go further. I've lost enough people already." Understood. Zoe looked at her team. Holly, who was checking her medical kit with the focused intensity of someone preparing for the worst. Karen, whose scales had shifted to a muted gray that suggested he was either camouflaging or deeply concerned. Possibly both. "Ready?" "Absolutely not," Holly said. "Let's go." The tunnels were worse than the surface. Much worse. Emergency lighting flickered intermittently, casting shadows that moved when they shouldn't. The walls bore scars, claw marks, blast scoring, dark stains that nobody wanted to examine too closely. Every 20 meters or so, they passed evidence of previous rescue attempts, abandoned equipment, breached barricades, the occasional piece of armor that had clearly failed to protect its owner. "This is fine," Holly muttered, her cybernetic arm's built-in scanner sweeping for life signs. "Everything's fine. We're just walking into a death trap with minimal protection, totally normal Tuesday." "It's not," Zoe started, then stopped. "Actually, I have no idea what day it is." Karen raised one clawed hand, the signal for halt. His inner eyelids flicked rapidly, processing sensory data. "Movement ahead. 3 contacts. No, 5. Thermal signatures are wrong. Fluctuating." "That's them," Zoe said quietly. "Shapeshifters. They're probably trying to figure out what we are." "Fantastic. Let's help them with that." Holly's hand drifted toward the plasma pistol at her hip, the one she'd insisted on bringing despite Zoe's objections. By which I mean, let's not become a learning experience. Zoe moved forward slowly, hands visible, posture non-threatening. The corridor ahead was dark, the emergency lighting having given up entirely in this section. Her headlamp cut through the shadows, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw them. Scourge stalkers. They didn't have a fixed form, not really. What Zoe's brain interpreted as creature was actually something that flowed between shapes. Predator, then shadow, then a mass of limbs that shouldn't fit together, but did. Bioluminescent patterns rippled across their surfaces, not aggressive red like the thornbacks, but a pale blue that might have been beautiful if it wasn't attached to something that had killed 23 people. One dropped from the ceiling, landing 3 meters in front of Zoe with absolute silence. Up close, she could see how it worked. The shapeshifting wasn't smooth, it was layered. Hundreds of flexible plates that could reconfigure, mimic textures, blend into anything. Right now, it was mimicking threat. Multiple limbs, sharp edges, A profile designed to trigger every prey instinct evolution had programmed into sentient species. Zoe did what she'd done with Scar. What Holloway had taught her to do when facing something that could kill you faster than you could blink. She crouched down, made herself smaller, and waited. The Scourge Stalker's form rippled, confusion evident in the way its bioluminescence flickered. Its head, if that's what the collection of sensory organs at the top could be called, tilted, studying her. Behind Zoe, Holly's breathing had gone very quiet. Karen hadn't moved at all, which was probably the smartest thing any of them had done all day. "Zoe," Holly whispered, barely audible. "What are you doing?" "Waiting for it to decide I'm not dangerous," Zoe whispered back. "Could take a while. Try not to look threatening." "I'm literally holding a medical kit. How threatening could I—" The Scourge Stalker moved. Fast. 1 second it was 3 meters away, the next it was close enough that Zoe could see her reflection in its shifting surface. Close enough to strike, to kill, to add her to the casualty count. It didn't. Instead, it leaned forward, if forward, applied to something without fixed geometry, and touched one of its limbs to the ground near Zoe's hand. Not aggressive. Investigative. The same way Spike had pressed its snout to her palm back in the enclosure. "It's curious," Zoe breathed. "It doesn't know what we are." "Join the club," Holly muttered. "I don't know what we are either. Suicidal, probably." The Scourge Stalker's bioluminescence shifted, patterns flowing across its surface in waves. And then, impossibly, it mimicked Zoe's posture, crouched down, limbs arranged in roughly the same configuration. "Oh," Zoe said softly. "Oh, you're smart. You're really, really smart." Movement in the darkness beyond. More of them, emerging from hiding spots that Zoe's eyes couldn't quite track. 6, 8, maybe 10 Scourge Stalkers, all watching this first contact with what she desperately hoped was curiosity and not hunger. Her headlamp swept across the tunnel walls, and that's when she saw them. The eggs. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, embedded in the rock face like some kind of crystalline growth. They pulsed with the same pale blue bioluminescence as the adults, and suddenly, everything made horrible, tragic sense. "The mining operation," Zoe said, loud enough for her team to hear, for her helmet cam to record, for Rookthor to see when he reviewed the footage later. "They drilled right through a breeding chamber. These things aren't invading. We invaded them." Karen's voice was tight. "Zoe, there are more coming. At least 20 contacts now. We're surrounded." The first Scourge Stalker hadn't moved, was still holding its mimicked posture like it was trying to communicate in the only way it knew how: imitation, adaptation, survival. Zoe slowly, very slowly, extended her hand. Not toward the creature, but toward the eggs behind it. A gesture, an acknowledgement. The Scourge Stalker's form rippled, and for a heartbeat Zoe thought she'd miscalculated, that this was the moment where everything went catastrophically wrong. Then the largest one emerged from the shadows. Had to be the Nest Guardian, easily twice the size of the others. Its bioluminescence pulsed in complex patterns that almost looked like language, like communication. It approached Zoe with movements that were simultaneously predatory and cautious, a parent protecting its young from a threat it didn't quite understand. Zoe stayed crouched, stayed small, stayed non-threatening despite every instinct screaming at her to run. The Guardian stopped directly in front of her, one limb extended, not to strike, but to mirror. The same gesture Zoe had made toward the eggs. Contact. The next 6 hours were, in Holly's professional medical opinion, the longest 6 hours in the history of time, and also probably illegal in most jurisdictions. Getting the Scourge Stalkers to trust them was one thing. Convincing Coalition Command to let them relocate an entire nest of shape-shifting predators without accidentally bombing the site was something else entirely. Zoe spent half that time in the tunnels, maintaining contact with the Nest Guardian while Karen cataloged the eggs. and Holly treated the surviving colonists, 15 people who'd been trapped in a sealed storage chamber, terrified but alive because the scourge stalkers had apparently learned to differentiate between active threat and scared humans hiding in a box. The other half, Zoe spent on the comm with Rookthor, who was having what could only be described as a very public crisis about his worldview. "This is unacceptable," his voice crackled through her earpiece, loud enough that even the scourge stalkers seemed to flinch. "You are proposing we relocate an entire colony of Class 6 predators." "Sentient beings," Zoe interrupted, watching as one of the smaller stalkers carefully mimicked the way she was sitting. "They're intelligent, Rookthor. They communicate through mimicry and bioluminescent patterns. They protected the colonists once they realized those humans weren't a threat. That's not predator behavior, that's reasoning." "That is—" Rookthor's mandibles clicked rapidly, the audible equivalent of someone trying to recalibrate their entire belief system in real time. "Impossible. We have classifications, protocols. Scourge stalkers are listed as non-sentient hostile fauna." "Then your classifications are wrong," Zoe said flatly. "Look, I'm sending you Ixkaran's recordings right now. Watch the part where the Guardian mimics my hand gesture. Watch how they're arranged around the eggs. That's not random, that's organized defense. These things have language, social structure, parental care. They're people, Rookthor. Weird, scary, shape-shifting people, but people." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, "If I authorize this relocation, and you're wrong, if these creatures attack during transport—" "They won't," Zoe said, with more confidence than she felt. "Not if we do it right. We'll need transport vessels with environmental controls, a protected habitat on an uninhabited moon, and, this is important, an official apology from the Coalition for destroying their breeding site." "An apology." Rookthor's voice was flat. "You want me to apologize to predators. I want you to apologize to sentient beings whose home we accidentally drilled through," Zoe corrected. "There's a difference. Also, it'll look really good on the official report. Very diplomatic. We're enlightened galactic citizens who don't just bomb things we don't understand." Another silence. Zoe could almost hear Rookthor's internal struggle. His military training versus the evidence literally recorded and uploaded to Coalition servers. Finally, "Very well. But human Zoe, if this fails, if there are any additional casualties, then you can say you told me so," Zoe said, "and I'll be too dead to argue. Deal?" "Deal," Rookthor said, and disconnected. Holly looked up from where she was running diagnostics on a colonist's broken leg. "Did you just negotiate our potential deaths like a business transaction?" "It's called strategy," Zoe said. "Also, I'm really hoping it doesn't come to that." "Same," Holly said. "I've got plans this weekend." "Well, I don't, but I could have plans. The potential for plans. I'd like to keep that option open." The relocation took another 18 hours. Transport vessels arrived, massive cargo haulers with specialized containment that Zoe immediately had them disable because putting sentient beings in cages is how we got into this mess in the first place. Instead, they created a voluntary boarding system. Zoe went first, showing the scourge stalkers that the ship was safe. The Nest Guardian followed, then the others, carrying their eggs with a care that would have been touching if it wasn't also terrifying to watch something that could mimic a bulkhead wall suddenly sprout a dozen limbs to cradle crystalline spheres. Commander Sulthrix watched the whole process with the expression of someone whose understanding of military tactics had just been turned inside out. "This should not be working," she said to no one in particular. "By every tactical model, every simulation, this should have ended in disaster." "Yeah," Zoe agreed, watching as the last of the scourge stalkers boarded the transport. "Funny how that happens when you stop treating intelligent beings like target practice." Sulthrix's antennae twitched. Amusement, maybe, or resignation. Rookthor is not going to let you forget this. You've made him look foolish. Good, Zoe said. Maybe he'll think twice before authorizing orbital bombardments as a first resort. The new habitat was perfect. An uninhabited moon with cave systems that mimicked the Scourge Stalker's natural environment. Coalition xenobiologists were already studying the recordings, drafting papers about first contact protocols and sentient recognition criteria. The footage of Zoe crouched in that tunnel, making contact with the Nest Guardian, was apparently being used in diplomatic training courses as an example of how to not get everyone killed through cultural insensitivity. Zoe found this hilarious. Rookthor found it significantly less hilarious. 3 weeks later, back at Celestial Ridge, Zoe was doing her rounds when Holloway found her in Enclosure 12. The thornback cubs had grown. Scar was nearly full size now, which meant large enough to accidentally kill someone through enthusiasm alone. The cub bounded over when it saw Zoe, and, yeah, some things never changed. "You're famous," Holloway said, leaning against the observation rail. "The Council's offering you Chief of Interspecies Wildlife Relations, full budget, your pick of staff, authority over all Coalition conservation programs." Zoe scratched Scar behind its auditory ridge, watching as the now massive predator leaned into her touch like an oversized puppy. "That sounds like a lot of meetings." "It is definitely a lot of meetings," Holloway confirmed. "Also politics, bureaucracy, and probably arguments with people like Rookthor who still think your methods are dangerous." "They are dangerous," Zoe said. "That's kind of the point. You can't build trust without risk." "So is that a no?" Zoe was quiet for a moment, watching as Spike and Runner joined their sibling, all three cubs vying for attention. Dangerous creatures who could tear through steel, now treating her like a combination of parent and climbing structure. "I'll think about it, but right now, I'm needed here. These guys still try to eat the interns." "Fair enough." Holloway pushed off from the rail. "Oh, and Rookthor sent a message. His species wants to study human methods. Specifically, they want to know how you manage to survive situations that would kill anyone else." "What did you tell them?" Holloway grinned. "I told them to start by not shooting everything that scares them." He wasn't amused. "He's never amused," Zoe said. "That's kind of his whole thing." Holly appeared in the enclosure doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking suspiciously pleased with herself. "So, I may have leaked that footage of you with the Thornback Cubs to the galactic news networks. You're trending on 6 different planets. There's a betting pool on what impossible thing you'll do next." "I hate you," Zoe said, accepting the coffee anyway. "You say that, but you keep letting me on these missions." Holly watched as Scar attempted to climb onto Zoe's shoulder, a maneuver that had been cute when the cub weighed 50 kilos and was now physically impossible at 300. "Face it, you're stuck with me." "Could be worse," Zoe admitted. "Could be stuck with Rookthor." "Speaking of," Holly said, pulling up a message on her data pad, "he sent you something. Actually, it's kind of nice." "I'm confused." Zoe took the pad, reading the brief message. "Your methods are unorthodox, statistically improbable, and contrary to established protocols. They are also effective. Perhaps there is value in perspectives that challenge conventional wisdom. The Chitix Republic wishes to invite you to consult on our wildlife management programs. We are prepared to learn from humanity's approach, however uncomfortable that learning may be. Ambassador Rookthor." "Huh," Zoe said. "Character growth. Didn't see that coming." "Are you going to accept?" Holloway asked. Zoe looked around Enclosure 12, at 3 massive predators who trusted her enough to act like oversized pets, at colleagues who'd followed her into situations that should have killed them, at a facility full of creatures that the galaxy had written off as too dangerous to save. She thought about the Scourge Stalkers, safely relocated and thriving in their new home, about 15 colonists who'd lived because someone had bothered to ask why instead of just opening fire. Maybe, she said finally, but first I'm going to finish my coffee and make sure these three don't eat anyone important. Scar chirped, a sound that came out more like a small earthquake given the cub's current size, and pressed its massive head against Zoe's side. The bioluminescent markings along its spine pulsed in content amber, the color of safety and trust. In the observation gallery above, a small group of visiting dignitaries watched in fascination. Zoe could see their expressions: confusion, wonder, and the beginning of understanding that maybe, just maybe, humanity's approach to dangerous things wasn't about taming them or destroying them. It was about learning to coexist with creatures that could kill you and choosing trust over fear anyway. Scar made another attempt at the shoulder-climbing maneuver, failed spectacularly, and settled for just sitting on Zoe's feet instead. 300 kilos of apex predator, pinning her in place like the world's most dangerous paperweight. "Yeah," Zoe said, reaching down to scratch behind the ridge of obsidian scales. "This is fine. Everything's fine." Holly raised her coffee cup in a mock toast. "Too humanity. Too stubborn to know when we should be scared. Too curious to leave well enough alone, and somehow still alive despite all evidence suggesting otherwise." "I'll drink to that," Zoe said. And in the tunnels of Obscura 5, now safely abandoned and marked as a protected historical site, bioluminescent patterns flickered in the darkness, the Scourge Stalker's way of marking territory that had been returned to them, along with something they'd never expected from the beings who'd invaded their home: respect, understanding, and a second chance. The galaxy was a dangerous place, full of creatures that could tear through ships and soldiers with equal ease. But somewhere in that danger was room for connection, for communication, for the kind of trust that only came from raising your arm higher when the predator cubs bit down and letting them climb up like they'd won some kind of prize. Humanity's superpower wasn't strength or technology or even resilience. It was the sheer, stubborn refusal to accept that understanding was impossible, even when everything with teeth and claws suggested otherwise.